In this video, we're going to review the properties of quadrilaterals, and we're going to make a little checklist so that you have a very quick reference tool for future quiz or test study guides, or just as a very quick study aid for your unit test and for the final exam. So we'll take each shape and we'll go down the list and check off which properties that they have. So we'll start with parallelogram. In a parallelogram, it is true that opposite sides are parallel. Opposite sides are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. Consecutive angles are supplementary, so they add up to 180, and those are on the same side of the parallelogram. And the diagonals bisect each other. And the diagonals will also form two pairs of congruent and isosceles triangles. These other characteristics belong to some types of parallelograms, but not all. So the one that we've checked is enough to have a quadrilateral be a parallelogram. Now rectangles can get a little more specific. So the rectangle has all the properties of the parallelogram, since rectangles are simply a special kind of parallelogram. What makes a parallelogram into a rectangle is that it must have 4 right angles. Another feature of a rectangle that helps us out is that the diagonals are now congruent to each other. And those are the two additional characteristics that are required for a rectangle. For a rhombus, again, rhombuses have, or rhombi, have all the properties of parallelograms. And then the rhombus has additional properties that make it a special parallelogram. So in order for a parallelogram to be a rhombus, all sides must be congruent. That's the main characteristic that will separate rhombus from just being a parallelogram. Then additionally, in a rhombus, the diagonals will bisect the angles, and the diagonals are perpendicular. So where the diagonals intersect, you get 4 right angles. So again, a rhombus, all the properties of a parallelogram plus these 3 additional properties. This first property, all sides congruent, is what's required for a parallelogram to be a rhombus. Now, a square is extremely specific. A square is the most special parallelogram we have. It shares all the properties of parallelograms. In addition, a square is also a rectangle because it has 4 right angles and congruent diagonals. A square also is a rhombus because it has all sides congruent, diagonals bisect the angles, and the diagonals are perpendicular. So a square contains all of these characteristics. Trapezoids are more special. They're longer parallelograms. So trapezoids are special in themselves. In a trapezoid, opposite sides are parallel, only one pair. And then in a trapezoid, consecutive angles will add up to 180, but only on the legs. Since you have one pair of parallel sides, the legs act like transversals, so consecutive or same side interior angles work, but only along the legs. For an isosceles trapezoid, again, we have one pair of opposite sides parallel. And we also, because it's isosceles, have to have one pair of opposite sides congruent, and those are the legs. And then one special characteristic of an isosceles trapezoid that's not listed on here is that in an isosceles trapezoid, opposite angles are actually supplementary. So opposite angles are supplementary. So here we can just kind of add this. In an isosceles trapezoid, opposite angles will be supplementary. And that concludes our quadrilateral properties. So this is a really good way to quiz yourself or have someone quiz you on those properties so that you know them for upcoming quizzes and tests.